In this video, I'm going to be modeling for you 3 of the strategies that we will be using in 4th grade to compare fractions. So deciding what fraction is greater than, less than, or if fractions are equal to. Yes, 4th graders can draw, and we do encourage that sometimes, but 4th graders have been drawing fractions since kindergarten. They were just working with halves and fourths all the way back then, and then they moved on to some other denominators and fractional units. So we really want them to kind of develop a better number sense and understanding of fractions by reasoning and not just drawing it out. And also because sometimes fractions can be very close in size, and so drawing it doesn't give the best help or strategy to decide which one is greater than or less than. So I'm going to be talking you through these 3 strategies. We will be using a 4th strategy that's not in this video yet, but it will be in an upcoming one. So getting started, these are the 3 strategies that we'll be using: common numerators, common denominators, and the use of half benchmarks. So starting off with common numerators, you can notice if 2 fractions have the same numerator, then you're going to actually hop down and think more about the denominator. So what this means is we have a whole partitioned into 6 pieces, and 4 of them are being shaded in or eaten or used in some way. And this one here, a whole, is partitioned into 10 pieces, and 4 of them also are being used. So the reason we hop down to the denominator is because in both fractions, 4 pieces are being used. So now we got to think about the size of the pieces. Well, in sixths, this whole only needed 6 pieces. This whole needed 10. More pieces means smaller pieces. So this is tricky because 10 is a bigger number, but tenths are smaller than sixths. So here, this is 4 larger pieces. This is 4 smaller pieces. So if you're using 4 larger pieces, 4 sixths is greater than 4 tenths. So that's the thinking they need to do. They need to think size of the pieces, because both of them are using 4 of their pieces. So here it's, well, how big are the pieces? All right, so that's one example there. Common denominators. So here, we're noticing that both of these have twelfths in their whole. This whole was partitioned into twelfths. This whole was partitioned into twelfths. That means the size of the pieces are the same. So we hop up to the numerator to think, well, how many of the pieces are being used, okay? So here, 7 of the twelfths are being used. 9 of the twelfths are being used, shaded, eaten, taken away, whatever it is. So for this one, it's more pieces are being used and the pieces are the same size. So 9 twelfths is greater than 7 twelfths. All right, so that's an example of common denominators. Common denominators tends to be a little simpler than common numerators. This one takes a little more thinking involved and kind of some backwards thinking of the sizes of the pieces related to the number it's representing. So denominators tends to be a little more simple for 4th graders to use. Numerators is a little bit harder. Our last strategy that we're using right now in 4th grade is using half benchmarks. So we're comparing the fraction to a half benchmark because there's nothing alike in them. There's no common numerator or denominator. So we got to think of something else. So this is what we do. We compare it to half. We think about, okay, if we have a number line, and here is where half is. Well, 2/8. I got to think about my halves benchmark for eighths is 4/8. 4/8 is the same as 1/2. They're equivalent. It's just another way to write it. So 4/8, well, 2/8 is less eighths, so it's less than half. So 2/8 would go somewhere around here, okay? But if I think about 3/4, well, the halves benchmark for fourths is 2/4. Well, so 2/4 would go right here. It's another way to say 1/2. So if this is 2/4, well, this is 3/4. So 3/4 would go somewhere over here because it's more fourths than the half benchmark. So 3/4 goes right there. So really kind of what we're doing is we're finding common denominators here. We're saying 2/8 and we're comparing it, or we're making a common denominator here with the half benchmark? Well, we're saying, okay, here's 2/8. What would half look like with 8ths? We're comparing it to 4/8, that common denominator. And we're thinking about 3/4 and we're comparing it to a half, but by using a common denominator of 4ths with 2/4. So here, since 2/8 is less than half, closer to 0, and 3/4 is more than half, closer to 1, 3/4 is greater. Okay, you could also use halves with a couple of these, with this example here, because 4/10 is less than the 10ths half benchmark. 5/10 is half, so less, less, less. 4/6 is more than the 6ths half benchmark, because this is 3/6. So again, 4/6 is greater than 4/10. So there's not always one right or wrong strategy to use. It's whatever fourth graders notice or what they become comfortable with. They typically will notice numerators and denominators and need to be encouraged more to do this. But sometimes if there isn't a common numerator and denominator, then we have to have this conversation about halves, benchmarks, and things like that. So use these strategies on homework when you're practicing talking about fractions and comparing them and ordering them. And be really careful with this one here, because the denominator, it's tricky. The smaller denominators actually mean larger pieces. And bigger denominators mean smaller pieces. So that's tricky. And help your fourth grader become fluent with equivalent variations of the half benchmarks, because those come in a lot of handy to them.